Uh, it's good to see everybody. Let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and get started. We saw each other yesterday. My name is Tandy McConnell in South Carolina. I'll ask my colleagues and my new colleague to introduce themselves. I'll ask if Mike, if you'll introduce yourself.
I'll be delighted. I'm Mike Miles from Birmingham, Alabama, and we've seen each other before a few times in the Indiana middle school competition and Indiana middle school finals, and y'all were wonderful that day. So I've been looking forward all day to seeing and hearing. This will be fun.
McCann, and I'm an attorney in Huntsville, Alabama.
And would you introduce yourselves and your teacher, please?
We are Unit 2 from Fall Creek Junior High. I'm Isabella Comer.
Lovely to see you all. I'm Macy Boyd.
Jacob Fry.
I'm Cade Joniak, and our sponsors are Patrick Bradshaw and Janie Medeiros.
And we are just all, it's just great to be here on a Saturday. I can't think of anything more fun to do on a Sunday afternoon on the day after Derby Day. And it's just awesome. Let's start with Unit 2. As I'm sure you have anticipated, question 2. In the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson stated that governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. From what sources do the people derive the right to establish government? How is the consent of the governed related to the concept of popular sovereignty? Does natural rights philosophy justify a right to revolution? Why or why not? Why might the principles and practices of self-government contained in the Declaration of Independence have been considered radical at the time? If you're ready, please begin.
The Declaration of Independence discussed various principles, including natural rights, consent of the governed, and representative government. The Declaration states,
governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed.
While the government gets their power from the people it is governing, the people get their rights to establish government from the principles expressed in the Declaration of Independence and U.S. Constitution.
The consent of the governed is closely related to the concept of popular sovereignty. Consent of the governed grants citizens the right to establish government, while popular sovereignty says all citizens have a say in the government. Both principles help build the foundation for an effective, citizen-led government.
Jean-Jacques Rousseau was a French philosopher who had a strong belief in socialism. In The Social Contract, he discusses the importance of all people giving their consent to be governed. It is a social contract in which every citizen must take a part in by being an active participant in the government. The document displays the relationship between the principle consent of the governed and popular sovereignty because it says all citizens should show their consent to fulfill the social contract.
We think the natural rights philosophy justifies the right to revolution because of the theory of natural rights, which was introduced in 1789. In his book, Two Treatises of Government, English philosopher John Locke emphasizes the idea of the natural rights philosophy, which included life, liberty, and property. Thomas Jefferson later adopts this idea and changes it to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to provide another reason for citizens to revolt. This right of rebellion becomes one of the many natural rights citizens of the United States possess. This new addition to the natural rights allows the right to revolt as you are in the pursuit of a happy life. Two Treatises of Government also states,
by this breach of trust, they forfeit the power the people had put into their hands for quite contrary ends, and it devolves to the people, who have a right to resume their original liberty.
This quote explains how if the government isn't doing its job, the people can use their rights to remove it.
Even in the state constitutions, the citizens are given a right to revolt if they feel as if their natural rights aren't being protected. The Constitution for Kentucky State's Bill of Rights says,
all free governments are founded on their authority and instituted for their peace, safety, happiness, and protection of property. For the advancement of these ends, they have, at all times, an inalienable and indefeasible right to alter, reform, or abolish the government in such a manner as they may deem proper.
The document says that citizens can abolish the government if their natural rights are being infringed upon.
The principles and practices of self-government in the Declaration were considered radical around the time of colonial America due to the large amount of monarchies during this time. In The Spirit of Laws, French philosopher Baron de Montesquieu talks about his concerns about having a republic. He expressed this by saying,
it is natural to a republic to have only a small territory, otherwise it cannot long subsist.
He thinks a republic wouldn't work due to the large population in the colonies. He goes on to support this claim by saying that in a small republic, it is easier for each citizen to be heard. In a larger one, the common good is sacrificed to 1,000 views. It is subordinate to exceptions, as Montesquieu put it.
Another reason the practices of self-government might not have been accepted was because the large-scale democracy had not been used since Athens. Athens, a small Greek city-state of less than 300,000 people, of which only 30,000 were even allowed to vote, had been the classical example most admired by the colonists.
They found that people in a democracy had to be very like-minded, and because of that, it would have been considered irrational to think a much larger, diverse group of people would have been successful using this type of government when Athens had previously failed.
Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government. The Declaration of Independence says that if the government isn't protecting the citizens' natural rights, they can do something about it.
We are now prepared for the judge's follow-up questions.
On the second, not bad at all.
You have given us a lot to think about. I want to begin with Montesquieu's critique of a republic, of republics as limited to small, and said that democracy need to be sort of like-minded. Was he right? I mean, are we not faced in the ever larger United States with a growing population of very people with very diverse attitudes towards just about everything? And does that threaten to tear us apart? I guess the question is, do we have to find some level of agreement in order to have a republic?
I believe. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Okay, rock, paper, scissors. Who goes first?
Cade, you may go.
I believe that we all need to be pretty much like-minded to have a good form of representative government, like representative of all the population. And going from this, a philosopher under the sway named Stephen Junius Brutus in 1579 wrote a book called Vindiciae contra Tyrannos, and he says the people lay down the conditions in which the king is bound to fulfill. And this shows how the people who need to have similar beliefs can lay down conditions to provide for a government.
Well, I see what my colleague Kate is saying. I do not believe that we have to have similar views. For example, in the colonies, everybody had different views during that time. Some people were still getting over the fact that we just parted from Great Britain. Some people wanted to go back. Political parties were beginning to develop. However, in some of the colonies, such as Jamestown, they were actually developing a different form of representative government. It included the House of Burgesses, which is very similar to the House of Representatives in today's government.
I personally agree with my colleague Cade. I think that the ideas have to be somewhat similar. For example, as Maxie said, we currently have political parties, and that is two options, and you can't choose one or the other at this time, especially with the Electoral College and all that. So you choose which one fits your ideas the most. So while our ideas can be more diverse, some of them we have to put into certain standards and fit them into different boxes.
All right, thank you so much.
Do you feel like a government of the people and by the people is fairly represented by an electoral college?
I feel that it isn't fairly represented by the Electoral College because you could get the 10 largest states with the most Electoral College votes and you would win the election. So I think there has to be a better way to have the Electoral College be more even.
I respectfully disagree with my colleague Jacob, because the Electoral College is representative of the populations of each state. So that would make it representative of all people.
While I see what my colleagues are saying, I agree with Kate, because even when it comes to voting, there are a lot of strict voter ID laws that don't allow people to vote. And then additionally, to add on to what I was saying, sorry, I think that only 70% of the population was voting not this past election, but the election before that, according to the United States Census Bureau. So I think a lot of people don't vote because of these laws.
I personally agree with my colleague Jacob, but I believe that it does not fully allow us to put in our say, for example, as he said, with smaller states and larger states in not the most recent election, but the one before with Donald J. Trump and Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton did not even visit Michigan, as she was sure that she would get the Democratic votes.
What constitute, as you put these poetic words down on the road to make them, to test them, what constitutes a revolution? Let me give an example. On January the 6th, a rally was held and encouraged people to go down the street and storm the building, and they did. But then they were arrested, and many of them are being put on trial. The governor of California and the governor of New York both have recall efforts going on, but there'll be another governor in their place if they are removed from office. What would it take in your lifetime, in the future of your life? What would it take for you to feel like a revolution was taking place in our country?
I feel like it
I
would
think
take.
you can go.
I feel like it would take a large opposition. For example, in the Civil War, majority of the states felt like their natural rights were being infringed upon because slaves were being taken away from them. Slaves were considered property back during the time of the Civil War. So I think if a lot of the states are trying to pull away from the Union, which is actually not allowed because of Texas v. White, which was a Civil War secession case that ruled the Union as indestructible, I believe that would constitute a revolution.
I also believe, go ahead.
I agree with my colleague Macy, because I think I believe that in order for a revolution to occur, it would have to, for me to want to have a revolution or revolt, I would think my natural rights would have to be infringed upon more than they would have to be infringed upon an absurd amount for me to want to have a revolution.
Going
Hey,
on.
Okay, don't lose your place. I want to follow with Jacob. What
Oh.
natural right would have to be infringed on to make you feel that way?
I think that the natural right that would make me feel that way would be my pursuit of happiness. Because I think if you're not, you could be homeless on the street and be happy with your life. But I think if you're not happy with your life, then if the government's not letting you be happy with your life, not giving you the chance, I think that would be a reason you would want to revolt.
That's a very good answer. Kate, now where were you?
Adding on to what my colleague Jacob said, and also answering your question, I believe, for example, the natural right of life, which was taken away from George Floyd by a police officer, and there was many protests from like the Black Lives Matter protests and things like that, and so that is an example where you can revolt if your natural right of life is being taken away.
I think that if my natural right of liberty was being taken away, I would see that as the most offensive. If the amendments in the Constitution weren't put in place, then the citizens wouldn't have these amendments that give us our freedom. So I think that if the amendments were taken away, that would violate our right to liberty. So I would therefore be quite upset with that. And maybe I would maybe think that it was time for revolution.
In that case, does the government have a right or obligation to give you to provide you with a COVID-19 vaccine? And do you have an obligation to take that shot in the arm?
Can you please repeat the question?
Sure. Do you have is it among the powers of the government to require you to get a vaccine?
I do not believe it's required to get a vaccine. Many people, such as people of different races, I'm sorry, may I please finish my thought?
Sure.
Okay, many people of different races feel like the vaccines are going to hurt them in some way. For example, a lot of people of color were being used as test subjects back in the day when they were testing different vaccines and cures for illnesses like they were for animals. I think a lot of people are upset by thinking of having to get the vaccine because of these reasons. I think that they may try to poison them and such.
Okay, thank you. A difficult place to end, but that's a good place to stop, because that just leads us to, it means there's more and more out there. This is a problem that does not end. And so we will be talking about this when you are judging these questions in 20 years from now. You're going to be having very similar problems to that to deal with, I suspect. Very nicely done. discussion about democracy, about the importance of, and Montesquieu's statement about the nature of republics, that does not come up often enough. And we tend to just, but he's got a point there. When people are have too radically different a view of a good government and the good life, and those problems, those conflicts, are going to be hard to sweep under the rug. And I think we will face a reckoning. I think we are facing that reckoning for this generation and your generation. So great job for telling us what we have in store.
First, I want to tell you, we noticed your pins. I like your pins being on you. That's pretty cool. I say all four of you have them. That's good. Isabella, I couldn't see yours, but I knew it was there. I knew it was probably there. You don't see that very often, and I'm grateful that you wore those. That's fun. That's great. I think you probably did. This is the 13th unit we've had the privilege of visiting with today. And by the 13th out of 14, you think you've heard most of what there is to say about that. We would have been wrong if we thought that. Y'all brought up some things today that had not been brought up before. You led us to ask some questions that we had not asked yet. You didn't heatedly disagree with each other, but you covered the subject incredibly well. Tandy, I think instead of them having to wait 20 years to judge this, 2 years might be enough. Come judge this in about 2 years. Yeah. But bring Patrick and Jeannie.
Got to get into the high school competition first.
That's right. Judge the high school one now. You could do that and put them in their place. They deserve that. Before Rita closes out for us, let us thank 3 people, Patrick and Jeannie. I've seen your teams before. I learn something from them every single time that I see them. I hear something I haven't heard before. And that's a real tribute to the 2 of you. And also because we may not have a chance to say this again today in the last session, Maria Gallo was in the hearing room with us. What some people have had to do with 1 unit, she's had to do with 14. She's had to keep this organized and running and get the scores done in a little while and do an award ceremony later and all of that. And it ain't easy. I've watched them do it, and it's not easy. And Maria, we want to thank you as much as anybody for staying after this and organizing it and letting the 4 of us, Jane and Rita and Tandy and me, come play with these guys this afternoon. Of all things we could be doing on a Sunday afternoon, we've said this several times today, I can't think of anything more uplifting than
Thank you
doing
very,
this.
very much. Thank you. You're all wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now let's hear from Rita.
Oh, it's all been said. I'm just shy and kind of try to stay in my spot.
Excuse me, I'm all right.
Hope you're all entertained by what he just did. I think by the end of the middle or the end of the afternoon or toward the end, you would think, yeah, we've already heard it. And I'm halfway bored and I'm halfway. No, you had me wanting to say, but what about this? But what about that? And it wasn't my turn to always say that. So I had to keep listening and not ask every single time. Y'all did great because you put some things out there that we had not heard before. The other thing I like is, what are y'all, 7th grade, 8th grade? Is that what you are? And you already know these things. You already pay attention to current events such that you can speak to them like this. Very, very impressive level of knowledge. And I know we've probably said it to some other groups. I'm not sure we said it to you yesterday. You're way ahead of an awful lot of students who are a lot older and a lot farther along than you. And you need to be very confident that you're going to do just fine in high school and in college, because there are plenty of college students right now walking around that don't have a clue what you've just talked about the same material. They don't know. And because you've had great teachers and because you've had great opportunity, you have a great opportunity and obligation to do more with your lives. So I want to wish you well, and I thank you so much for letting us be with you today.
Amen.